Meeting of Audit and Finance. First item is 1B, adoption of the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And then the next item is 1C, approval of the minutes from October the 1st, 2025. Any opposed? Due to our CFO has not yet arrived and we were in communication this morning. He's on Zoom. Okay. Speaking with him, unless there's a opposition from committee, I'd like to move the order of and start with the audit, the internal audit items. 2C.
You're changing the minute in the agenda.
The order, yeah. There's the internal audit, the firm that's here. If you both wouldn't mind coming up, and it'll give Mr. Prentice enough time to get into the building.
You all want to sit. It's easier to put your laptop for here, use this microphone. Might be easier for them to sit.
Sure, yeah.
Going to set a table. Yeah. Table here. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present the results of two internal audit activities we did over the past few months. So if we could advance to the next slide. We'll skip introductions. I think we've introduced ourselves a couple of times, but I'm Matt, this is Brianna. So overall, we're going to take you through the results of two internal audits that we completed. Accounting and student activity funds. Maybe just a brief overview of how we structure the reports. We'll walk through the focus areas and objectives of each internal audit. We do typically try to share some areas of recognition, things that we see going well within our respective audit units. And then we get into the findings piece. Again, these are not structured to be, gotcha audits. We're typically looking for departures from district policy, district general practices, general best practices, and really looking for opportunities through these findings to communicate recommendations for improvement for the specific subject matter. And then lastly, on this summary, we do also typically try to communicate other non-finding, non-internal control exception-related opportunities for improvement. Those would not be directly traceable to an audit finding, but still something that we saw that we think merits discussion and consideration. We're happy to run through at a high level each of these internal audit activities. My associate here, Brianna, will take us through the detail. At any point, we're happy to stop, answer questions, et cetera. Happy to have a discussion. But if you prefer to save questions till the end, that's also fine, just as well. So, all right, Brianna, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Hey, so moving forward to the accounting internal audit, we will start with the results there. Thank you. So in this internal audit, we addressed the general ledger accounting, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and fixed asset accounting processes. And then we also looked at system access and segregation of duties within the ERP system UNIS for a few key activities within the accounting in scope process areas. In our internal audit, we evaluated policies and procedures, conducted interviews with the accounting staff to confirm their practices, identified internal controls relevant to the in-scope areas, and then performed sample-based testing as well to confirm performance of those procedures and the internal controls that we identified. In a few areas that we performed sample-based testing over included journal entries, payment run authorizations for accounts payable payments, three-way match in accounts payable, balance sheet account reconciliations, accounts receivable invoicing, and collections and receiving receipts. fixed asset additions, retirements, and physical inventory results. Then to start with our first finding here, we noted that the district had not yet established a formal process to monitor, manage, and collect on past due accounts receivable balances. So our recommendations for this process to be established and documented, including collection efforts, the cadence in which the district should be following up with customers or payees to encourage payment, guidelines for determining balances that are deemed uncollectible, and writing off those balances to clean up accounts receivable, and then also defining approval thresholds for authorizing those write-offs. Next finding, accounts receivable reconciliations were previously performed on an annual basis. And through discussions, we had identified that the level of review precision that was being applied to these reconciliations was not sufficient to actually identify, investigate, and resolve any variances in that reconciliation. So to address this gap, the accounting team proactively performed that multi-year re-reconciliation covering multiple fiscal years that they completed earlier this year. And through a review of this reconciliation, there were still a couple of reconciling items that had been carried forward year after year that had not been resolved yet at the time of our review. So for this finding, we recommend that the reconciliations for accounts receivable be increased to a monthly basis, since this is an account that's close to cash. Also that these reconciliations should be independently prepared and reviewed on an ongoing basis. And then to resolve those couple of outstanding reconciling items, and then establish a process to ensure that in the future, reconciling items are not carried forward without resolution. And next, in our inspection of Munis access, we had noted instances where there was access beyond what was required for the specific role for that staff member. So for instance, there were a few accounts payable staff who had access to modify vendor information. This is a function of the procurement team. It's not something that is performed by that accounts payable team, but they still did have the system access to initiate those changes. And then additionally, the accounting team is responsible for fixed asset maintenance, but there were instances where there were users outside of the accounting team who had the same rights to modify fixed asset information as that team did. So in our testing, want to confirm that we didn't identify any instances of misuse of this access. And there are mitigating and compensating controls that would, review any erroneous changes. But we are always going to recommend that the principle of least privilege is followed to make sure that the system rights and privileges align with specifically what each individual is responsible for in their role. So the accounting team is working with the business intelligence team to review and reassign access. Then lastly here, through our procedures around fixed asset physical inventories, had identified that there are instances specifically around school construction where assets may not always be communicated to the accounting team for them to be able to record those in the fixed asset ledger, issue asset tags, and then they identify some of those when they go to do physical inventory accounts. So the upfront communication, sometimes they don't receive a full listing of those assets. So CCSD has implemented process to where they're using an outside firm to apply those asset tags, communicate that information back to the accounting team with a template to record them. Construction procurement will review any blanket purchase orders to identify items that would need asset tags and require tracking. And then there will be a final sign off by the accounting team at the close of projects to address this going forward. Okay, and then we had one opportunity for implementation of a best practice. So balance sheet account reconciliations for accounts payable, due to, due from, and sales tax payable are being prepared on a monthly basis, but these reconciliations are not being reviewed until year end, and then the review is not documented. So because of the volume in accounts payable, we would recommend that this reconciliation be reviewed at least quarterly, just to make sure that it can be reviewed in a sufficient enough detail, based on the volume that's in those accounts. And then also to document evidence of review to maintain that audit trail. So I'll pause there in case there's any additional questions before moving into student activity funds. Okay. Okay, so for student activity funds, we evaluated cash disbursements, receipts, and oversight performed by the central office accounting team over these funds through the form of account reconciliations. And we looked at a sample of 9 schools throughout the district, including high school, middle schools, and elementary schools. Similarly to accounting, we had looked at relevant policies and procedures. We met with the bookkeeper and principal at each of the in-scope schools as well, and then met with the accounting team to discuss practices and expectations around student activity funds. Do I need to pause?
You keep going.
Okay,
I'm
okay,
having,
sounds great.
I'm still having technical difficulties.
Okay,
I'm trying
no,
to get their
no worries.
attention.
So we performed sample-based testing over the receipts, disbursements, and account reconciliations again to confirm performance of the internal controls identified and adherence to procedures, particularly in the student activity funds manual, which contains the guidelines for schools to follow. So before diving into the first finding, just wanted to give some background on the receipting process. So staff will receive funds from either a teacher or staff member for things like field trips, clubs, fundraisers. They document receipt of those funds in a duplicate receipt book to provide a copy of the receipt to the individual who provided those funds. And then once those are all collected for the day, they should prepare what's called a breakdown sheet, which documents everything that was received, the type, cash or check, the total amount, what it was for, and what account it should be deposited to. And then they submit this breakdown sheet and those funds to the bookkeeper or deposit at the bank.
I have a question real quick. Is this related to the weighted student formula at all?
This is not.
Okay.
So in our testing, we had identified some instances where, can we go back one slide? I'm so sorry. I'll keep going in the meantime, but in our testing, we had identified some instances where the receipt amounts, thank you so much, on the breakdown sheet and what was deposited in the bank did not consistently agree to those receipt books when we had inspected them. And bookkeepers are oftentimes not also looking at the receipt books at the time of deposit, so they're not proactively identifying instances where a teacher may not be submitting all of the funds. So our recommendation is for there to be a process established where those receipt books are inspected. And also to reinforce the expectation for staff to prepare a breakdown sheet and submit the funds on the day that they're received to mitigate against loss of funds just due to timing and holding funds over a period of time. And then the second finding, we noted instances where there were multiple days of receipts combined into one breakdown sheet, or staff were holding funds before turning them in. So again, that recommendation would be for there to be a regular review of the receipt books. If possible, transitioning to a triplicate receipt book, so then a copy of the receipt can also be provided to the bookkeeper. Along with those deposits to do that, almost three-way match between all the information received. And then if duplicate receipt books do continue to be used in the district, then visual inspections could help catch those items more proactively. And then reinforcing that expectation to turn in receipts to the staff members if they're holding funds for multiple days.
I have a quick question, and perhaps the CFO and the superintendent can, with this high priority issue, would this be an area that we could try out the AI to streamline this?
So the first area that we're looking at is accounts payable in particular, but there is some opportunity here as we look at student activity in general. The biggest issue with student activity is, you've got such a large swath of schools that are intaking cash and collecting, and, each school had kind of previously adopted their own approach to things. And so this is an effort to try to, create some consistency in their practice as well. Yeah.
That's why I was thinking that, because it does seem to be pretty broad, that maybe AI could be a big assistant. And anyway. Sorry, please go ahead.
No problem at all. Okay, so for the next finding here, our first moderate priority finding. So per the student activity funds manual, payment or refund request form should be used to authorize purchases. But in testing, we saw the form being used, but it was not being used to authorize a purchase. Instead, it was used to approve the purchase after it had been made. So the order of operations just was not in alignment with the student activity funds manual. The recommendation is for in the review, bookkeepers and principals to just confirm that this form appears to be used prior to the purchase to authorize a purchase, reinforce the expectation with the staff member if that is identified as not being performed, and then reinforcing this requirement through training for school staff. Next, per the student activity funds manual, invoices should be signed by the receiver to substantiate that those goods or services were received in full prior to payment. And then additionally, once that payment is issued, the invoices or receipts should be stamped as paid to prevent duplicate payment. And in testing, we did see that this was not consistently being performed. So recommendation is for this to be something to consider in review to verify that these invoices receipts are signed by the originator of the transaction prior to issuing the check, and then after the check, reinforcing expectation for bookkeepers to be stamping these as paid to prevent those duplicate payments, and then reinforcing these steps during training. Next, deposits should be recorded in Munis and deposited at the bank on the same day that they are received. And in testing, we noted instances where deposits were recorded in Munis or taken to the bank more than 3 days after that breakdown sheet date from the staff member who received the funds, or instances where the receipt was recorded in Munis but then deposited at a later date at the bank. And do acknowledge that the date differences between the breakdown sheet date and the receipting in Munis could be due to staff not turning those forms in on time. So I'm going back to our first recommendation for our first finding, getting eyes on the receipt books to confirm that these funds are being turned in on a daily basis. And then secondly, reinforcing the expectation for bookkeepers to be recording these the same day that they're received, taking them to the bank the same day that they're received. Next, the student activity funds manual says that receipts should be submitted for reimbursement by staff within 30 days of the purchase. Noted instances in our testing where there were receipts submitted beyond that 30-day mark. So having this as a review point for bookkeepers or principals to keep an eye out for the review and kind of reinforcing that 30-day expectation to make sure that reimbursements aren't kind of accumulating throughout the year and kind of being turned in bulk. And then for finding 7 here, we had noted instances where teachers and staff are not consistently attaching a copy of the office receipt from the bookkeeper to the receipt book. It's part of the process for the bookkeeper to then provide the staff with a copy of the Munis receipt for them to retain in their receipt book as the audit trail for when the receipt was turned in. This is also leveraged at year end by the principal who performs an annual review over the receipt books at the end of the school year. So spot checks could be implemented just to address instances where these aren't being retained more proactively. So prevents kind of chasing down that documentation then at the end of the year. And regarding all of those findings, the accounting team met with the bookkeeper and principal at each of the schools where we identified those issues, and the schools provided a management response. They have already kind of reinforced expectations, started to implement actions to address the findings identified, and will be performing ongoing monitoring throughout the year to support adherence to the student activity funds manual and watch for these issues. And then there were a couple of opportunities for best practice improvement that we had identified. So a few areas where the student activity funds manual could be strengthened. One around the timeline for submitting invoices for payment, defining that timeline in the manual. Secondly, if the school office does receive funds, then setting the expectation that they should also be using a receipt book as well to record those funds. And then additionally, consider developing a checklist to include in the manual that might assist bookkeepers or principals in their review of disbursements or receipts to kind of support consistency across the schools. And then second opportunity here, there were a few instances where we noted the payment refund request forms weren't completed in their entirety by the staff submitting them, or the staff were using an outdated version of the form. So in the student activity funds manual, it did see references to the kind of outdated version and the current version, so just recommend that just the manual be updated to only include the current version, and to remove any prior versions from internal repositories, just to make it clear what version of the form they should be using. And then also for this to be something that's looked out for in review to confirm that current versions of forms are being used, all the relevant information is provided in submission of those forms. Okay. So for student activity funds, schools have implemented actions already. Accounting will work to implement actions by the agreed upon deadlines for those findings as well. And then we are currently working with management to determine timing for conducting follow-up testing to confirm implementation of the action plans from this audit and from prior audits. And then to provide an update on other internal audit activities, we did complete an internal audit of expanded learning, exceptional children, and operations planning and real estate reports will be provided to management this week. So we do expect to provide an update on those reports at the December meeting. The student support internal audit is nearing completion, and then we are also kicking off the federal programs internal audit this week.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Was this, and Mr. Grabowski had to go and put out a fire at another location, so he apologizes for having to leave. But of the 9 schools that you've highlighted, was this a sample or was this comprehensive?
It was a sample.
That's what I thought you had started out by saying, it was a sample. Okay. And do you have like a determination based on the sample of district-wide?
We didn't, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, for this type of thing, we wouldn't normally extrapolate like an error rate across all schools within the district. If we wanted to get a better or more comprehensive sense of activities at other schools, we're very happy to work with the team to work others into a rotation type schedule. Maybe following some communication of these best practices, give the other schools an opportunity to adopt some of these so that we can come in and take a look at.
So certainly there's enough data here to suggest that perhaps system-wide we can standardize a process.
We can certainly infer based on what we've seen that we're probably going to see some departure from standard at others, but maybe understanding your question a little bit better now, we've not projected that on specific schools, but I think this is a good basis for some best practice recommendations for these schools for them to consider and implement.
Okay. Mr. Prentice, did you want to add on?
Yeah, so part of our strategic plan, and I'm going to actually bring this to the Audit and Finance Committee in December. So we put together a staff level strategic plan for the division over the summer that started July 1, and there's several key objectives and goals in there. One of those is bookkeeper training program and mentorship program to try to make sure that throughout excuse me, I'm having the same, what it is this morning.
This is the season.
Mhm. So to make sure that bookkeepers throughout the system are getting consistent training, and that we have a way to track turnover, and overall, kind of new hire type orientation mechanisms for people that are coming into the system. You have people in schools that have been the bookkeeper for 30 years, and you have some schools that have a bookkeeper that's been there for just a few months. So pairing them together with their more tenured peers and also having a training program standardized from finance to make sure that they're getting the same information consistently, in addition to the student activity fund manual and guidelines in the accounting department, doing additional trainings throughout the year to make sure that we're consistent with the application of those things throughout the system.
And if you do utilize AI to streamline this, to do the checks and balances, one thing I was considering, I don't know on your end administratively, but utilizing like push notifications on cell phones to remind teachers and the bookkeepers that if you've had a form and you've gotten everything, to make sure that you follow the standard process.
Yeah, so we on the this is not student activity fund, but on the PTA, PTO booster side, every school has some form of a parent-teacher organization of sorts. And there was a law that was implemented last year that required some mandatory reporting and consistency by those organizations. And so as part of that, we have implemented a new system called Givebacks to where they're essentially having to work through the same platform. And there's a lot of automations in there. So there's some opportunities to look at something like that on the student activity fund side of it as well. The other thing that we've done that's rolling out in the next week is we're issuing student activity fund purchasing cards that are restricted in terms of how they can be used to try to cut down on some of the paper and manual check writing process that's happening for small transactions and reimbursements. We see a lot of parent goes out and buys pizza for a school-wide event or something like that, and then there's a manual reimbursement check that's cut. And a lot of those things, if they were handled by CCSD internally, which it is internal, but within the confines of an administrator having a P card going out and making a purchase, there would be kind of a standard procedure that they would follow. And the student activity funds, based on the virtue of who they're interfacing with, being a parent or some other third party, in a lot of cases, you see some manual stuff implemented. And so those student activity fund P cards, the principal will be able to assign, and they have very limited purposes for what they can be used, even down to the transaction or vendor level. So they can be used to secure purchases that are needed to be able to expend those funds without requiring that subsequent reimbursement process and some of the manual things that are happening now. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at that just kind of enhance the best practices and also bring those funds closer into how we administer general operating funds and other throughout the system.
Very good. If from the other committee members, does anybody have any input?
I just had a couple quick questions. One is on the audit findings, it sounded like most of them you'd already remediated, and then maybe one, the remediation, I think is the account reconciliation that's going to happen by year end. Will you all go back and revisit those? You mentioned going back and revisiting the student activity fund findings. Will you also revisit those just to make sure that you're comfortable with the remediation was successful?
Yes.
Okay.
We're going to add all of these to that matrix that's in the package. And so as they're cleared, we'll status them green and put our follow-up comments there and work with Plant Moran to make sure that they see the corrective action that's taken. A number of those have been addressed or were addressed midstream. The first one, for example, in accounting, we knew we had predominantly out-of-county tuition accounts receivable balances that we had to deal with. And so as we were working through the audit, we were already in the process of dealing with those things. And then the final closeout will be the standardized procedure that gets implemented. Again, as part of the strategic plan that we'll talk about at the next meeting, one of our goals, and this goes into AI, is using an AI tool to create an internal LM that will bring in all of our existing SOPs and create a consistent standard operating procedures manual across the totality of the division that reads and is implemented in the same codification standard. So right now we have a student activity manual and we have standard operating procedures in the budget department, and we have all of these different things that are in place and and are updated from time to time. And so one of the goals of the strategic plan is to bring all of those things in and then have AI work to look at overlaps and opportunities for improvement and track the consistent updating of those over time. So between now and this time next year, we're working to bring all of those things in with the AI tool and then create an LM that users throughout the system can use to research standard operating procedures and get answers without having to hunt through various different manuals. So I think that'll help as well.
Thank you.
And then my other question was on the student activity funds on implementing all this process. I'm suspecting that we were dealing with lots of small dollar transactions at different times of the day and they all relate to totally different events and things. It seems like it will be a hard thing to establish that consistency. I know you laid out the process for doing that. Do you view this as a slam dunk, easy, get through training and it's done, or do you feel like this is going to be a perpetual re-education exercise?
This is a perpetual exercise. When you're talking a system of this size, with the number of players and, the different sizes of schools and the turnover that can happen over time is something to consistently keep an eye on the ball. But I think through, having some consistent training programs and some things to keep on top of that, we'll be able to keep the schools more in line. Like I said, there were just a lot of things that had kind of changed over time. As one administration was used to handling it this way, and then, somebody else came in and they're like, okay, well, we're going to go back and look at the student activity manual and make sure we're doing it right. We do have a staff auditor internally that works on student activity. And so she goes school to school and does spot audits and making sure that, high level procedures are in place and that things are being followed. And so she'll continue to do those things as well.
Thanks.
That's why I was suggesting the use of AI and push notifications directly to people's phones would greatly expedite that process and keep people on top of it. Anybody else? Mr. Wooster?
So you mentioned that you're going to tap P cards now for
Mhm.
them. Is your staff auditor going to be monitoring that as well on a daily basis? Okay.
Yeah, on the student activity side. So these cards they're orange. It says student activity fund across the top of it. The MCC codes are restricted in terms of what they can be used for, and they have a low limit. And then we have internal limits right now for reimbursement for food and student purchases, and so they're tied directly to that, and they have to be assigned and pulled back in, turned on and off as they're used. So it'll unlike the staff issued P cards that have a $5,000 limit, for example, with a wider MCC code opening, these are going to be very much restricted to kind of be point of sale based to prevent that reimbursement process.
And I had one last question. One last question. On the AR side of things, there were two findings related to AR. How significant is our AR balance dollar wise?
It like $200,000.
Okay, that's what I thought it would be pretty minimal.
So it was pretty good.
Okay.
I don't have the balance right off the top of my head, but I can,
It's fine.
Okay.
I'll dig it
Okay.
up for. I just
Sounds-
figured it was probably nothing too significant.
I want to say the aging on the out of county tuition was around 141,000, if that number sticks in my mind.
Okay.
And that was the largest piece of it, that from a multi-year standpoint. And we went through, it's an unfortunate thing to talk about, but you get students that have enrolled from outside of CCSD. And the way the law reads is they have to pay a commensurate tuition based on the local property tax calculation on a per pupil basis. And so they had been invoiced, didn't pay. And then it says that, upon non-payment at a certain point in the year, they're to be unenrolled from school. And so we implemented a collection procedure, invoicing, follow-up letters, and then subsequently sent notifications about a month ago advising them that if they didn't pay, they were going to be unenrolled this semester. And amazingly, a lot of those balances all of a sudden were cured, and accounts were paid current. And now we are working on that diligently each year to make sure that we follow that. And I think that in turn is going to keep that AR balance down significantly from where it was. And then the procedure on top of it will implement.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much for your time and for your examination and presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll move back to the top of the agenda, which is items 2A, capital projects report, September 2025. With that, Ms. Costello, I will call you up. Not able.
Thank you and good morning. Committee Chair, Ms. Watley, Superintendent, Ms. Huggins, and committee members. I'd like to present the September Capital Projects Report. Our 2023 through 2028 sales tax capital program revenues were $176,975 above our cash flow model projections, which are based on the most recent collections with a 2% growth over the prior year. The expenditures for the programs are as follows. For the 2010 through 2016 program, $20,000. The 2016 through 2022 program, $2.5 million. The 2023 through 2028 program, $15.9 million. The 2023 through 2028 long-term debt program, $3.4 million. The fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 25 program is in its final stage of completion, and the fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 26 runs from March 2025 through June 26. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I'll open it up to the committee. Anybody? Thank you, Ms. Costello, very
Welcome.
much. Now on to items 2B, monthly financial report. I will hand it over to the CFO, Daniel Prentice, if you can
I,
discuss the
I,
information.
I have the information.
Okay.
So the monthly financial reports, we have September general operating fund report, the Head Start report, as well as the weighted student funding report. So through the month of September into the first quarter, we don't have any substantial notes here on the monthly financial report for the general operating fund. Our property tax revenues will begin to come in strong over the course of the next 2 months, and expenditures are tracking on budget. One thing I will note, as it ties to my previous comment about out-of-county tuition, are under local sources, the revenue that's come in so far to date. We have already exceeded our out-of-county tuition budget for the year as a result of the collection of those balances. So for the first year, we're collecting about $500,000 in out-of-county tuition, and it's about double where we were last year. So as we continue to see the enforcement of that policy and that law, I think that'll be a nice little revenue stream that we can adjust our budget for in the upcoming year. So that's part of that local category, and we're keeping a close eye on that as we continue to see the interest in enrollment in CCSD schools from folks that are not residents of Charleston County. That tuition is about $11,000 per pupil.
And I'm sorry, it's about a what?
$11,000 per pupil.
That's low considering, okay.
So it's a combination of the calculation of the revenue we receive from the state, because when that pupil enrolls in CCSD, we do get the state revenue for them, as well as, of course, the tuition collection. So that composite ends up being around $17,000.
Okay, so the 11,000 is just the out of.
That's just
okay.
the portion that they pay on their own.
Okay, and that doesn't take into account that if they are going to a school where they receive wraparound services? Or do we collect more for that?
No, so the tuition it's fixed based on that calculation of the average per pupil amount.
Because I know some of those schools can get up to $30,000 per student.
So this is that I think you're thinking about the charters, maybe?
Well, Daniel Jenkins and some of these other schools that have all of these other supports. If we have a child that's been admitted to CCSD from out of county, or would they receive those services as well? Or at that point, would we say that they have to go back to the county where they're zoned?
They would be eligible to receive the services, but I will say that the majority, I think, if not all, of the out of county enrollment is in Lucy Beckham School of the Arts Academic Magnet.
They are in those.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So nothing further on the general operating fund report. Don't really have anything on the Head Start report, but of course, with the ongoing federal government shutdown, we've received some inquiries from our media partners and just inquisition in terms of what's going on with the Head Start program. And of course, we are continuing to administer that program. Those employees are employees of CCSD, and they're continuing to be paid. And we have a process in place to facilitate our quarterly claiming, with hope that the government reopens shortly. But in terms of the ongoing administration of the Head Start program, there are no issues there. The only thing I will say is we're planning on bringing to the committee today our application for the upcoming 5-year grant period. But because of the federal government shutdown, that deadline for submission has been delayed. So we're going to bring that to you in December. So we're continuing to work through that and have a presentation for you next month. And then everything is tracking as expected on weighted student funding. You will see on that report, I'll just call to your attention, some areas where schools have gone over budget in terms of the total amount net of encumbrances and year-to-date actuals. And a lot of that has to do with our payroll encumbering process, where we encumber funds based on the salaries and benefits of the employee and the remaining salary to be paid for the rest of the year. And we have some benefit adjustments and things that happen throughout the year when people elect a different benefits package, from going from individual to full family, for example. And so we're going through and reconciling all of those things, but we don't see any areas where a school has truly overexpended their allocation based on the plan that they put together. So happy to answer any questions there.
had a
Yes, sir.
question. There were some schools that looked like they hadn't spent much at all yet. Was there, uh, is that geared towards the spring more so, or would there be a reason that there were a
So
couple schools that had like over 100,000 in weighted student funding that was?
can you give me I can give you an example and I can look at it specifically.
I'm looking at a different thing than I felt like I was in my car this morning. I thought.
I think we all are.
I know, right?
And the chief of IT here can't get his IT to work, so it's challenging.
Now that I can see what they've already spent, so that's one stuck out. They've spent a significant amount. They've just got a decent amount, 25% left, which is not much. I was just assuming that might have been all of their budget left. So I'll take my question back.
Okay. I was just saying,
So we'll look at it when we can see it and we'll call you.
we don't have any schools this year that, haven't allocated out their plan the way that we did last year. We saw a significant,
Mm.
kind of race to the finish of the budget process for people to get their plans put together, and a lot of really thoughtful and strategic allocation of the funds in those plans. Really the only thing here is, depending on when we run the report, we do encumbering monthly. And so if a subsequent pay period is posted, during the month and the encumbrance hasn't been adjusted for the end of the month, sometimes it can create some variances. But we don't see any areas where, available balances are really concerning. That
There are some that will be and have earmarked specific strategies for the winter and spring semester. For example, high dosage tutoring, the attendance incentive program. So they are, expected to deliver some resources and exposure for students in the winter to the spring semester as well.
And when Mr. Garrett, when you made that comment, one thing that comes to mind for me is somebody that's got, a position. So if the salaries and benefits were $100,000 for the year, that full amount's encumbered. But to Dr. Clamp's point, if they had a strategy for $50,000 in tutoring and they haven't entered that requisition to get a purchase order yet, then those funds wouldn't be encumbered and they'd still be showing as available. But in their plan, they've allocated those funds to tutoring to happen later in the winter, and they will be encumbered.
We do have success, Mr. Prentice, and I know you've seen this as well, but the outcomes-based tutoring experience has really taken hold, and we've got a number of schools experiencing that both now and will later.
Yep. That was, if you remember back around this time last year, I think we presented that outcomes-based tutoring program that was going to be implemented. We sent a couple of staff through the Center for Outcomes-Based Contracting training, and we delivered a request for proposals for high dosage tutoring services as our first outcomes-based contract. We had 18 vendors engage and agree to hourly rates for tutoring services and contracts that would deliver scalable compensation based on outcomes. And so a lot of schools have picked those up, and we're seeing a pretty substantial engagement with those vendors, which has been awesome to see.
Last question, with the ones who are sort of over encumbered for their budget, are those typically something that would have been approved internally?
So in our review of those, for example, I'll pull one up that's got, I'm not pointing anybody out, but Moultrie, they have $366,000. They have 364,000 encumbered and 48,000 expended. And with our payroll encumbering process, I would wager that a majority of those funds are encumbered for salaries and benefits. When this report was run, and I don't have the date that the report was run, there might have been one payroll that was processed, so it's showing up in that expended column, but the encumbrance hasn't been reduced for the month. And so
that are essentially over budget by, let's say, 148,000.
it's just a mechanism of that encumbrance getting adjusted monthly, but the payroll is already processed through for half of the month because we pay biweekly. And so, they paid one pay period, it posted to the expended column, and then the encumbrance is still reflecting the full month's amount. And then at the end of the month, they reduce it down for the amount that's been liquidated for the month. And so sometimes, depending on when the report's run, can show some variances. this is, in all of our reports system wide, those encumbrances adjust monthly, and we've got to figure out a way to maybe report this a little bit differently to show that those are not, true over budget issues. But we kind of went back and forth, like, do we want to encumber payroll for the purposes of showing how much is truly encumbered, or do we want to just leave that off? And I think really we wanted to show from an encumbrance standpoint that, the majority of the funds are, utilized for some purpose as allocated in a plan versus, not doing that at all.
Does anybody else have anything? All right, we will then move on to the next item, which is going to be the 25-26 Charleston County Early Head Start FY 26 financial support report. Ms. Foxworthy.
Oh, that's
Oh,
yeah, all part of
okay.
that same item. So there's
Okay,
nothing
I
to call out
thought
there in
that maybe
particular.
she might have something else to add, especially since she's here. Next month?
Good.
Yeah. You're okay with not reporting this one? All righty, and then we've already covered item C, so we'll move on to item D. Purchases and contracts greater than 250, Mr. Prentice?
Yes. So we have the purchases and contracts over 250 on the portal on the website for the month. Nothing really of note to point out there, but of course we do update that Power BI dashboard every 30 days with everything that has been expended, or everything that's been encumbered, I should say, over $250,000 tied to a purchase order. I think the total amount for the month was $16.5 million. Majority of that is tied to our capital expenditures. So happy to answer any questions about the dashboard.
I'll open up to committee. Anybody? No? Okay, then we will move on to item E. Mr. Prentice.
All right. Well, the cycle never stops, but we are getting ready to kick off the FY27 budget process. And so we have the milestones calendar included there. This follows us distributing the internal budget calendar, which is significantly longer, to all of our departments and offices throughout the system, letting them know what expectations are for the upcoming fiscal year. But in earnest, we'll begin board engagement over the next month or so and making sure that we're kind of talking about our high-level priorities and updating our long-range projections. So likely next month, I'll bring to the Audit and Finance Committee a long-range forecast update as we see the audit completion come into focus. We're wrapping up the FY25 audit now, and so we're using those numbers to plug into the actuals and do some comparative analysis of the year end to our projections, and then updating the model through FY 2030. And then going into the new year, we will put some budget workshops together as we typically do starting in March, but we'll be bringing kind of a major composite of the budget to the Audit and Finance Committee in February. Priorities, if you look at the long range plan, are to maintain our compensation increases that have been accomplished over the past couple of years. As you know, last year, FY25 and FY26 were the two big adjustments. And then moving forward, we're really focusing on kind of a CPI adjustment to both teacher and classified compensation. And so now we're kind of going into this maintenance of, the things that have been accomplished, and keeping up with additional expenditures for ongoing programs that have been approved and placed into production, supporting the long-range sustainability of weighted student funding. And so we're finishing up now our FY27 per pupil allocations based on the 45-day enrollment of students with disabilities, pupils in poverty, and multilingual learners in schools to be able to start communicating that and thinking about what happens over the course of the next year. We will do what we did this past year and meet with all of our departments and offices about their expansion requests to give them an opportunity to explain what it is they're asking for in terms of how we put together the proposed budget, and look forward to trying to work the same process where the budget gets approved for second reading in May. So we built the calendar this year around a process where first reading happens in April and second reading happens in May, and all the key dates, including a special called Audit and Finance meeting that will happen. I believe that is in April, to be able to advance that recommendation, to give y'all an opportunity to see everything once it's fully developed and to get the budget book in time to be able to make a recommendation to the board.
Mr. Prentice, my apologies, the IT let me know that my links are now working, so you should be as well. Did we speak with Audit and Finance about, I know we spoke with the board, but about the expansion of universal daycare, and I think we also spoke about the early childhood development.
So that when we get into kind of the, probably January, February timeframe, we'll bring all of those priorities with some dollar signs attached to them to look at, all the areas of priority for the budget process. We will, absolutely.
I just wanted to
Um,
give them a heads up about that.
I will say, and you recall the good news we got month or so ago about the budget award for the distinguished presentation of the budget that met the national standards. So that was a good accomplishment this year. I have some good news for you coming up next month as well. It's embargoed at the moment, but we'll be bringing that forward to the Audit and Finance Committee and really just trying to continue to build on the work that's been done. But we're ready and excited about the upcoming year. So, and everything is, moving forward as we expect this year as well.
Wonderful. Does any of the committee members have anything else to add, comment, or express? Well, thank you all for your grace and patience this morning. It's been like a manic Monday.
It has been a Monday, but a Wednesday. I apologize for my tardiness today. The traffic this morning was very interesting. I did want to share with the committee just in the good news column. We sold bonds yesterday for the general obligation issue that you authorized the past month. And for $135 million GO bond, all in true interest cost was 2.61%. So that was a nice result to see. And that was to Wells Fargo as the lowest bidder. I think there were 8 different bids on that. And so that is a tremendous savings and interest, over the course of the next year, compared to where we were projecting based on the current market. And I'm sure bolstered by the recent GEO rating upgrade. So thank you for your support in all of those areas as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anyway, life does tend to throw curveballs at you, but yet we persevere and we overcome, adapt, improvise, and overcome, right, Mr. Perroy? All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time, our next meeting is December the 3rd, 2025. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?